This is BBC One Scotland. Now, The Sunday Show with Gary Robertson.
Good morning and welcome to The Sunday Show. I'm Gary Robertson. Here's what's coming up for you this morning. Alex Salmond has died. The former First Minister became ill while attending an international conference in North Macedonia. He was a giant of Scottish and UK politics. His career brought Scotland to the brink of independence. But he became a divisive figure and recent years saw questions over his character. We'll have reaction to his death from the current First Minister John Swinney, who'll join us live. And we'll hear from some of his former colleagues, the former MP Joanna Cherry and Jeff Aberdeen, who was a close advisor when he was SNP leader. And then it's over to Laura McKeever on BBC Radio Scotland and BBC Sounds. What's coming up this week, Laura?
Morning, Gary. We will continue to look back on the life and career of Alex Salmond. We'll be joined by Lord Jack McConnell, who he succeeded as First Minister. We'll hear from his former speechwriter and also former colleague Alex Neil, among many more. I'll be here from 10:30.
OK, well, listen out for that. And it's great to have you with us. Let's get started. Well, as you might imagine, it's a very different programme for you this morning compared to the one we were expecting to bring you yesterday evening when news of the death of Alex Salmond broke. Well, I'm joined by our Chief Political Correspondent, Lindsay Bewes, who can talk us through events. What do we know about what happened yesterday, Lindsay?
Well, Gary, we know Alex Salmond died suddenly yesterday at the age of 69. He'd been in North Macedonia attending an international conference. He was a panellist at a cultural diplomacy forum. Now, the North Macedonian government have said that Mr Salmond lost consciousness at a hotel at around 3:30 in the afternoon local time. Now, local media reports said he collapsed during a lunch and was pronounced dead at the scene. The Alaba party have said that the cause of death they believe was a heart attack. That would be confirmed in a post-mortem. Now, news began to break here in the UK later yesterday afternoon, and it came as a huge shock to everyone. Alex Salmond was still very much involved in public life, still a frontline politician, and the reaction to his death, I think, has illustrated the hugely significant role he has played in UK politics, with reaction to that coming from across the political spectrum.
Well, we're going to talk more about that in just a moment or two, Lindsay. Thank you. We'll discuss his legacy in just a moment with Lindsay. And we're going to speak to the current First Minister, John Swinney. But first, our political correspondent, Kirsten Campbell, has been looking back at the life of Alex Salmond.
I heard a rumour. I think we won the election.
Alex Salmond became Scotland's fourth First Minister after the SNP beat Labour in the Scottish Parliament elections in 2007. His time in the SNP was nothing if not eventful. He joined as a student, and at one stage he was expelled for his membership of the 79 Group, a left-wing faction. As a former economist turned MP, he was ejected from the House of Commons after he interrupted a budget speech in the days before such debates were televised.
I beg to move that Mr Salmond be suspended from the service of the House.
Margaret Ewing MP 186. Alex Salmond MP 486.
He would go on to lead the party, not once but twice, first in 1990.
The Labour leadership may win the battle for the yuppie votes in the south. We're going to win the battle for the hearts and minds of the Scottish people. Well, folks, it's good to be back.
The second time came after he famously ruled himself out.
If nominated, I'll decline. If drafted, I'll defer. And if elected, I'll resign.
In 2011, he delivered what was supposed to be impossible, an SNP majority at Holyrood that led to a referendum on independence for Scotland.
Each and every one of us to convince our fellow citizens to vote by majority for a new dawn for Scotland.
But the result didn't go in his favour.
As leader, my time is nearly over. But for Scotland, the campaign continues and the dream shall never die.
He would go on to successfully sue the government he once led over its handling of harassment complaints against him.
I've made many mistakes in my life, political and personal, but I have not sexually harassed anyone, and I certainly have not been engaged in criminality.
He admitted some inappropriate behaviour, but was acquitted by a jury of criminal charges. A Holyrood inquiry didn't believe there was a conspiracy against him. It led to the breakdown of his relationship with his successor. One of his proudest achievements was free university tuition. But his confidence in his own judgment hasn't always been justified. He faced criticism for opposing the NATO bombing of Serbia in 1992.
It is an action of dubious legality, but above all one of unpardonable folly.
His decision to host a chat show on Russia Today caused controversy, and his determination to lead Alaba, a brand new pro-independence party, took people by surprise. Alex Salmond inspired admiration and disquiet in equal measure, but few would doubt that he was a formidable force in Scottish politics.
Kirsten Campbell reporting there. Well, Lindsay Bewes is still with us. He was a political giant. Talk to us about the significance of him politically.
Yeah, Gary, it's difficult to overstate his influence, his contribution, his impact on not just Scottish politics, but on politics across the UK. Taking the SNP into government for the first time in 2007 was a huge moment because it completed that journey for the party from the fringes into the mainstream. And then in 2011, achieving what nobody thought was possible in the Scottish Parliament, a majority in an electoral system at Holyrood that is not set up for that. That, of course, paved the way for the 2014 referendum, masterminded by Alex Salmond. It was the cause, of course, that drove his politics. And then taking Scotland so close to leaving the United Kingdom that would have redrawn the boundaries, the borders of this country and changed the political landscape. And in many ways that event, that independence referendum, did change the political landscape because it shifted the focus of the debate that we've had in Scottish politics over the last decade. Now, Alex Salmond, I think, everyone recognises was a formidable politician. He'll be remembered for his political skill, for his ability as a tactician and for his devotion to that cause of independence that drove him.
But of course in recent years he left the SNP, he had this very public falling out with Nicola Sturgeon. There was the court case that we heard about there from Kirsten and his acquittal. How much does all of that potentially tarnish his reputation? Yeah,
I mean, he was a divisive figure even before those events of more recent years that you refer to, that acquittal of sexual offences charges in a criminal trial in 2020, his fallout, spectacular fallout with Nicola Sturgeon, his successor, over her government's handling of those harassment complaints against him. And some of the details that emerged during those events certainly have diminished his reputation, and his decision to host a TV show on Russian state television also did that. Those who knew him said that he would never retreat from public life. He would never step back completely for good from frontline politics. It was very much part of who he was. And as we saw, he was a politician right to the very end.
Lindsay Bewes, thank you very much for that. Well, Alex Salmond was the man who brought the SNP into the mainstream of UK politics. It's sometimes easy to forget, given how dominant the party has been in the last decade and a half. When he was first elected to Westminster in 1987, he was one of just 3 SNP MPs. His political success made him the person who'd come closest to breaking up the UK and achieving the dream he shared with many, to see an independent Scotland. Well, one man who was part of that journey is the current First Minister, John Swinney, and he joins us now. Mr Swinney, we're grateful for your time this morning. What are your thoughts on the death of Alex Salmond?
First and foremost, I want to express my sympathy to Moira, Alex's wife, and to his family, because Alex's untimely death will be a terrible shock to them, as it's been a terrible shock to everybody else in Scotland and further afield. So first and foremost, my thoughts are those of sympathy at the loss of an enormously significant political figure who took the SNP from the fringes of Scottish politics to the very heart of government, and took our country incredibly close to becoming an independent country.
What do you see as his greatest achievements, given, as you say, he moved the party from a party of protest to one of government, to one of majority government, and then to secure that independence referendum in 2014?
I've been involved in politics a long time, not quite as long as Alec, but we worked together for many years, and many of those years were pretty threadbare, to be honest, threadbare in terms of the electoral success that we enjoyed. And as you said in your introduction, when Alec was first elected to the House of Commons, there were only 3 SNP MPs, and when I was elected to the House of Commons, I became one of 6 SNP MPs. And it was tough going to get our message across and to get the attention that we required onto the arguments for Scottish independence. But the moment in which we became the government in 2007 was a moment which, I think in all honesty, I didn't think I would probably witness, but we did, and we've gone on to serve in government for 17 years subsequent to that. So I think the transformation of our prospects as a party and the transformation of the idea of Scottish independence from being a peripheral idea to an idea that's central to the politics of Scotland is some of the fundamental work that Alex Salmond led and delivered.
Well, as you mentioned there, your relationship goes back, more than 40 years, or potentially 40 years with Mr. Salmond. How would you characterise your relationship with him? How well do you think you knew him as a man?
I obviously worked closely with him, and it was a working relationship that we had. We focused on what we had to do to make sure that we built the SNP and that we were successful. And obviously, I served in his government over a period of 7 years, and he essentially was, he encouraged me to simply get on with doing the work that I needed to do to manage the public finances and stimulate the economy. He led the strategic direction of the government, but he left people like me to get on with the jobs that we had to get on with. And that was very much the nature of our relationship, that it was a working relationship focused on making sure that we served the people of Scotland and that our party was able to advance its political campaigns.
And talk to us, if you will, a little bit about his political journey, because he was something of a left-wing firebrand in the early days when he joined the SNP. In fact, it led to his expulsion at one point. But he did move the party to potentially the centre ground for that breakthrough into government. How big a journey was that for him?
Well, Alec started off his journey very much as a voice of progressive left-wing views within the SNP. He wanted the SNP to have a left-of-centre policy position. He was part of the 79 group in the 1980s that argued for that position. I think over the years he came to realise that you had to lead from essentially, in Scotland, the moderate left-of-centre of politics, and that's what he did. And of course that became famously successful for us, not just in 2007 when we entered government for the first time by reaching out beyond the traditional base of the Scottish National Party to win new supporters, but then in 2011 to win that majority in the Scottish Parliament that nobody thought was feasible. And I suppose the importance was then attached on to broadening the support for independence, which resulted in us coming incredibly close in 2014 to winning the independence referendum with a level of support for independence that had never previously ever existed in Scotland. You know, most of my political life up until that moment, independence support very rarely broke through 30%, but it got to 45% in the actual referendum, and in some of the polling was polling above 50%. And that was an indication of the transformation of the attitudes within Scotland, which remains the case in Scotland today, and that's what we have to build on in our politics.
So he reshaped the SNP, but it seems from what you're saying he reshaped Scottish politics too.
That's undeniable. The idea of independence for most of my political lifetime was as a peripheral concept in Scottish politics, and it essentially is a central argument to how our country progresses. And that's come about as a consequence of the efforts that have been put in over these last 30, 40 years to build that argument and to get us to the position that we now occupy in Scottish politics.
I wonder how much you believe his legacy has been affected by recent events. Lindsay Hughes ran through some of those, that court case where he was acquitted, but the fallout from that continues. What is your assessment of that?
I would have to accept that the last few years have been difficult years, and there will be times to reflect on these issues. But I think what's undeniable is that Alex Salmond was an enormously influential and significant figure in Scottish politics, and he transformed the prospects for my party, and he transformed the prospects for the country. And I think those aspects of his legacy are recognised and understood right across the political spectrum, and I think have been recognised in the media commentary over the course of the last few hours.
But I wonder, as First Minister, as leader of the Scottish Government, have you regrets over the mishandling of those complaints against Alex Salmond from staff within the Scottish Government? The women who complained may feel that that undermined their position and denied them some justice.
Obviously, these issues have been the matter of public record. They've been set out and discussed at length within the parliamentary processes and other processes that have been underway in Scotland. I think at this particular time it's appropriate to reflect on the political contribution of Alex Salmond and to acknowledge that that has been significant in transforming Scotland.
What was your relationship like with him in recent years?
Obviously, we've become somewhat more distant than we were when we were close colleagues working within government. Obviously, after the referendum, Alec chose to stand for election to the House of Commons and was successful again there and returned to the House of Commons in 2015. To his horror and the horror of many of the rest of us, he lost his seat in 2017. And that, I think, was undoubtedly a very difficult blow for Alec at that particular moment. So obviously we've been less in contact in the course of recent years, but I acknowledge the significant contribution that he's made to Scottish politics and to transforming the arguments for independence.
I wonder if you regret not being able to mend that relationship.
Well, I saw Alec over the summer. We met at an event in Edinburgh and he congratulated me on my election as First Minister, and we talked at that moment about the experience of being First Minister, and obviously I now take forward those responsibilities, appreciating, now that I occupy the office of First Minister, of quite the scale of demands that you have to wrestle with as First Minister, and I obviously want to draw on all of the experience that I have to make sure that I can properly and effectively fulfil those responsibilities, which are demanding and which I know Alec took very seriously when he was First Minister.
First Minister John Swinney, we're grateful for your time on the programme this morning.
Thank you.
We'll have more reaction in just a moment when we'll hear from more of those who knew Alex Salmond well. Before that, let's just look ahead to next week and debate night with Stephen Jordan.
Thank you. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland giving you the chance to put your questions to the people in power. This Wednesday, we're going to be in Kirkcaldy. Just go to the website for more information about how you can take part. It's bbc.co.uk/debate night, and make sure you join us every Wednesday, 10:30 for Debate Night on the BBC Scotland channel.
Well, let's speak now to Jeff Aberdeen, who worked closely with Mr Salmond as an advisor around the time of the 2014 independence referendum, and also to the former SNP MP Joanna Cherry. Thank you both very much for joining us this Sunday morning. You were both personal friends of Alex Salmond. Joanna Cherry, let me ask you first how you're feeling this morning.
I'm feeling very upset, Gary. Thank you for having me on your programme. This has come as something of a shock to all of us, particularly Alex's friends, but most particularly his wife and his family. And my thoughts are primarily with Moira, a tremendous woman in her own right, Alex's wife this morning, and also with his family and all his loved ones. A sudden death like this, particularly when he was abroad on business, is just shocking and devastating.
And Jeff, what are your thoughts on the passing of your former boss, ultimately?
Well, profound sadness, of course, and I share the shock that Joanna Cherry just outlined, and I also would like to extend my own sympathies to Moira, somebody I know extremely well, and I know who'll be grief-stricken at this tragedy.
And Jeff, just tell us a little bit about how you came to work with Alex Salmond. What kind of boss would you say he was?
Well, I was in Aberdeen University doing a thesis on the economics of independent Scotland in 2004, and I bumped into him in an airport and asked him to give me a quote, and the rest, as they say, is history. It was a quite transformative experience for me personally to work for Alex Salmond and the SNP at that time, which was really the most amazing period in Scottish political discourse from 2004 to 2014. Alex Salmond became leader of the party again. We won in 2007 that breakthrough election, and of course the landslide in 2011, which paved the way for the Scottish independence referendum. It was a hugely exciting and electrifying period in Scottish politics, and I'm privileged to have been part of it.
And Joanna Cherry, obviously you were elected in 2015, but before that you were prominent in nationalist politics. How much did Alex Salmond influence you on your political journey?
It was a huge influence. Of course, Alec first led the party back in 1990 when I was still quite a young woman, and then he famously came back and led the party again in 2004. I didn't actually become a friend of Alex till after the independence referendum. He was somebody I had admired from afar and met on a couple of occasions, but of course we both became MPs in the SNP landslide in the British general election in 2015, and it was at that stage that I got to know him well as a loyal friend and an immensely supportive colleague, and somebody who always offered tremendous leadership and political strategic nous.
And Jeff, what was his view of politics? Because he was obviously someone who, it appeared, enjoyed the cut and thrust of politics, the political theatre. You know, he wasn't shy of a stunt or two if that got him noticed.
Absolutely right. And when I started working at Westminster prior to 2007, the SNP had 6 MPs. And yet they were leading the charge on issues such as opposition to the Iraq War and indeed the cash for honours crisis. They were dominating the headlines with only, a rabble of MPs at that time. And he understood that to make the SNP relevant, you had to create a bit of a song and dance. You had to create a noise. And of course, when he became First Minister, I also felt that was the making of him, but I also felt it was the making of the position of First Minister, and he relished being First Minister every single day. And I reflect on a couple of things, if I may. Grangemouth's been in the news a lot recently, and if we think about his ability to save that refinery, he got the unions together and he got Jim Radcliffe together, absolutely polar opposites there, to save that. And I think that gives you an example of something that he wanted to do for Scotland. He understood the importance of these strategic sites. And I think these are the sorts of things that he relished as First Minister.
Yeah, Joanna Cherry, one of the newspaper headlines this morning describes him as going from rabble-rouser to First Minister. And that really is quite a political journey.
It is quite a political journey, and of course in doing so he took support for Scottish independence from the fringes of Scottish politics right to the heart of it, where it remains, notwithstanding the SNP's drastic defeat at the recent general election. Repeated opinion polls still show that support for independence is at a high level and a level to which he drove it. But I think, if I may just add, I think what Alec had as a politician, and I've said that he was one of the finest politicians of his generation and the finest First Minister we've had to date, is as well as being a strong leader, he had an ability to reach out to people who disagreed with him. That's why he's got so many cross-party friendships, or had so many cross-party friendships. And also, when he was First Minister, he didn't just surround himself with those who agreed with him and everything, but he wasn't afraid to have people in his cabinet who had perhaps been his political adversaries within the party in the past. He had a hinterland beyond politics, unlike many modern politicians. He had had a profession beyond politics. He was a talented economist and could have made a lot of money and been very successful if he hadn't gone into politics. He was also immensely widely read and had a great understanding of international politics and international affairs. And I travelled with him widely in the wake of the Brexit vote and was very impressed by the esteem in which he was held across Europe.
Although Jeff Aberdeen, we know that perhaps there was another side to him as well. He was deemed to be something of a hard taskmaster. You talked about being sacked several times, I think, when you worked for him. Explain that other side to Alex Salmond that perhaps the public didn't always see.
Well, I think with such a talented politician, he is a generational politician, he's a fierce intellect, you had to challenge him, and that was my role as Chief of Staff. You know, I had to give him the opposite view, whether or not I agreed with that view that I was taking, and we used to get into some feisty exchanges, there's absolutely no doubt. But, you know, all those 7 times I was sacked, I came in the next morning because I loved every minute of that job. And he needed to be challenged, there's absolutely no doubt about it. But he never asked me to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. And I think that's what people expect from the First Minister of Scotland.
And Joanna Cherry, of course, recently we had the court case. He was acquitted, but there are still ongoing issues around all of that. His TV show on Russia Today caused consternation among some in the SNP, his falling out with Nicola Sturgeon. How much does all of that affect his legacy?
I think it's very important to remember that the 2 major court cases in which Alec was involved, Alec was acquitted, found innocent on all the charges, all the criminal charges against him. And in relation to the Scottish Government's investigation, the court said it was void because it was tainted by apparent bias. And we've also heard, because we've all read about how long it took the Scottish Government to concede that against their failure to take their lawyers' advice. So I think we have innocent until proven guilty in this country for a reason. And I am very dismayed as a lawyer by the lack of respect there's been for the jury verdict in Alec's criminal charge. And it sometimes concerns me that people don't take seriously enough the gravity of the fact that a government investigation against a former First Minister was found to be tainted by apparent bias. Now, of course, Alec has an outstanding civil action, and there are outstanding criminal investigations, which we can't say very much about. And I think it's a terrible tragedy that Alec has died before he was able to be completely vindicated. But I believe that time will vindicate his name. And I think more and more people across the political divide in Scotland are becoming interested in what exactly went on behind the scenes in relation to Alex Salmond. And I think it's the great tragedy of Alex Salmond's career that so many of his erstwhile comrades and political colleagues and friends were either stabbed him in the back or turned their back on him in his hour of need. I found that pretty disgusting at the time. And I'm very proud that I stood by him. And I think it's very important that as we talk about him in the days to come, we remember that he was acquitted of all the criminal charges against him.
Although we also have to point out he did admit inappropriate behaviour, and the former First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, recently accused him of abusing his power while in office. I wonder if we could just finish with you, Jeff.
Hang on a second.
Well, just be very brief, Joanna Cherry. I'm sorry, we're running out of time.
It's very different from criminal behaviour.
No, absolutely. But I'm just pointing, just to put it...
We're all flawed individuals who do inappropriate things from time to time. He was acquitted of the criminal charges, and that's a very significant matter.
Jeff Aberdeen, just in the final 30 seconds or so we have of the programme, what did he mean to you?
Well, he shaped who I am today. I learned so much from him in terms of his ability to strategically solve issues in front of you. And those are words of wisdom throughout my time with him. I'll always remember. If I can just say one thing, I was in the room when he did his resignation speech, and he said that the dream of independence shall not die. It's not dead, and it's not dead because of the work of Alex Salmond, and it's for others now to ensure it stays alive.
Hear, hear.
Jeff Aberdeen and Joanna Cherry, thank you both very much indeed for being with us this morning. And that is all we have for you this morning on this part of the programme. But if you're listening on the radio or on BBC Sounds, Laura McKeever has much more for you, including further tributes to Alex Salmond. But from me, thank you for watching. Goodbye for now.
Joke.